The session is titled in the program. It's titled Peer Artist Interview, but we wanted to go into the methodology, the techniques around interviews, particularly interviewing artists, either for publication purposes, but how to maximize on an artist interview. I think we're thinking that we're going to go through a few basics, that what we think are basics. If there's anything that we will leave out, then people are more than welcome to share. This is not a learning, it's a information sharing session. So I think we all have some kind of experience in terms of writing, in terms of doing interviews at different levels, and there are some who have more experience than others. So please, it's a democratic space. Anyone is open to share. And then we're going to have some interactive activity at the end where we are going to put what we've been discussing into practice, with the objective of that possibly making it into the zine, or making it onto some kind of documentation as part of this writers' workshop. So yeah, you want to start?
Shall I kick off? We just thought we'd kick off with a few things from our own experience that we try to do if we're interviewing both an artist we might know, but also an artist we don't know. And the first thing I think is the preparation and research for the interview. And that is obviously reading what's online. Maybe if there's a place where you think, their gallery, is there any material on them? Do you come here to the library? But to really find out as much about them as you can. I think online you do have to remember that what you read is not always 100% accurate. And sometimes for an artist they have information that's been reported incorrectly once and then is reported incorrectly throughout their lives. So do the research, read up as much, particularly look at the work and what work they've been doing. Does it fall into phases? Did they go anywhere particularly? Did they have a residency that might have shifted their perspectives? Try and get a sense of what their life's been like. Did they go to art school? Maybe they didn't. Or maybe they did something completely different. So just try and map things out for yourself, and make sure you feel kind of prepared, because we're going to come on in a minute to interviews can take, it's an interactive conversation, so you don't know what's going to come up. But if you've got knowledge, some knowledge, it makes you're in a position to respond. Or if there's something new, you think, oh, okay, you acknowledge it's new and say, I didn't know about that. But I think preparation and research are really kind of quite fundamental. And if you can go and see some work, or if they're doing a performance, all of that helps, because actually you're looking at the work, whatever the work is.
And another thing just in relation to that, I guess as part of the preparation or the research, is to have a set of questions ready. Have a set of questions ready so that you just don't get there and ask questions that will lead to one-word answers, yes, no. But also allow for some flexibility in terms of the questioning. I don't know, we were thinking of the structures of the type of questions being, I think we all know them as being open-ended questions. So we can, as a group, discuss what those kinds of examples of questions are from experience, or just to give examples of what kind of open-ended questions are. And I know that Tessa had about 4 or 5 examples of questions that maybe we could start off with, and just use that as an example of the basic set of questions that might work for any situation. Whether it's an artist that you have a standing relationship with, or if it's a new artist, but we thought these might be like the basic questions that might apply to like an entry-level interview situation, and they are.
Okay, can I just say, I think for me, when I'm preparing, while you need to be completely flexible, you need also to have in your mind what are the broad areas that you want to kind of cover. And you might want to jot those down, regardless of how you ask the question. What is it when you get up to say goodbye that you feel you've captured different things? What motivates them, what their techniques are, that kind of thing. And so my questions very much relate to that. So what do you feel you want to get out of this interview? That might be connected to who you're writing it for. What is the publication? Is it something you're trying to propose to a publication so you don't know? And if so, this interview needs to be perhaps different to other interviews that people can read online. Are you getting some new insights? Or is it something particular that maybe has happened recently that you particularly want to ask them about? So what are the 4 or 5 things that for you are the purpose of this interview? Is it tied to a show? Is it perhaps a new body of work? Is it they've suddenly won an award, so you want more of, well, how did they get there? I think that's quite helpful.
And how is it not like rehashing existing public knowledge or existing interviews about that person? How's your interview going to be different or open up something new to your audience?
And I think the other thing about the kind of structure of it, for me, I try to have questions that are quite open-ended, as Joan said at the beginning, so that it's kind of a, good interaction. You can get a sense of where they're coming from, how they like to talk about their work and themselves. Some artists find it extremely difficult to talk about their work and they're quite shy. So I think open-ended questions give you a lot of opportunity to, okay, so who is this person? Maybe you know them already and that's fine. But if you don't, the interview will go through different stages, and what you're trying to do is get to know the person. And I also, if it's not obvious, and maybe they've had a very bad experience of somebody doing an interview and kind of misquoting them or getting the wrong end of the stick or whatever. And they may be a bit kind of, I want to get through this as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and maybe just before you mention those, another thing is that not all interviews are face-to-face. I was saying to her that in my language we have this thing, and it might be in your culture as well, that you get more from someone when you're looking into each other's. The news are in the eyes. That's like the direct translation. So we know that it's not always possible to have those face-to-face, in-person interviews, but technology does allow us to use other forms like Skype or even WhatsApp video calls. But I think you get more from someone in a interpersonal, face-to-face, either via technology or sitting like this.
Okay, shall I start going through these sort of very, very broad, and then not necessarily, I might craft these questions, but it is some of the kind of things to think about. I wouldn't ask them in this way, is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. I'd couch them slightly differently, but I'm keeping it short for us because I think you'll be familiar with this. What's your background? Do you ask that first? Do you actually ask it later on? What's kind of integral to the work of this person? What's important to them You know, and that might be the subject matter, it might be their kind of how they use materials or whatever. Do they feel strongly about the role of the artist? And what do they feel their role is? What have been the key moments in their career? Because your reading of what their key moments may be very different to what theirs is. And I also try to ask at some point, what do they look at? What for them in art's been either influential or encouraging, or so those are some of the and I suppose another one is why do you do what you do? I might take a slightly different road to that. And how do you work? And that might be kind of making sure that you're talking about some of the practicalities. Is the work temporal, you know? Is it made over time? If they're performative, what does that mean? Those kind of things. And as far as possible, I think it's helpful, and what Joan said earlier is early questions are quite open-ended. See what you get back. Really kind of read them. And then, of course, you're coming off script and you're kind of maybe, oh, they said something and you want to pick up on it. Do you pick up on it now or later? And that, I mean, you have to make a lot of decisions in your mind, I think, at an interview.
So we can discuss more on other aspects of ethics around interviews that will make life easy or make the process easy for both. But I think, respect, the basic courteous manners are important. So
I think manners is a nice way of saying it.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think kind of, how would you like to be interviewed? And sometimes people say something and then say, oh, but don't print that. And that's both a good sign that they're feeling they can share, but you need to respect that. And then you can say, oh, but I think that's very interesting. Can we just kind of, you might want to kind of scroll back, and so how might we cover that? You know, if the work is deeply personal, sometimes to explain the work, they have to tell you what the personal experience was, but they don't want that experience kind of there. And so I think it is kind of manners, being respectful.
And developing some kind of trust, because I don't think for most of us when we do these interviews, we think it will be the first and the last. You want to build, in most cases, to build a relationship or maybe expatiate from being just an interviewer. You might end up being a biographer. It might develop into something more. So earning that trust, personally for me, is important.
But and the kind of second sentence to what Joan said is, but you do want to get to the end of the interview and feel you can write something that's interesting, tells a story, and you don't think, oh, I should have asked this, this and this.
Follow-up interview?
You know, are they going to agree to that? Is there time for that? I mean, if you say this is one of two conversations, then fine. I always think you definitely need to plan, you've got enough time. They need to be saying to you, I'm sorry, I've got to go now. You can't be saying to them, I'm sorry, I've got to go now. And if it is short, then it's kind of agreeing, well, this has been really helpful, but can we go into a second conversation? I know this all sounds very basic, but actually it's thinking about those things beforehand and then taking a whole stack of notes. And if you want to record, which with all our phones is so easy, I think if we're thinking about ethics, ask if that's okay. Some people do not want to be recorded, and some people think, yeah, because then you'll get the story right. So
some are intimidated.
and you won't get as good an interview, potentially, if they're not used to it.
We put that down actually as a collective thing. If there's some tips for interviews as a collective that we can share with each other based on our experiences. So if anyone wants to respond, then we can just talk about those tips. In addition to, but I wouldn't advise them. I don't know. I keep thinking about, circumstances. I know a lot of people like to do studio visits or go for coffee, but other forms of enhancers to loosen up, to loosen up people, bring a bottle of whiskey or so.
I thought that a bottle of whiskey is just as good as the hidden recorder.
Yeah.
because you're just, I mean, it's more or less.
So it's manipulative.
I think so. Ethics again. Well, that's the option they give you. At least just get us the facts, You don't necessarily have to attribute it if they have a problem with how, maybe if they're reluctant, or maybe if they tell you it's off record, then you don't need to attribute it to them, but then you can just lay the facts down as they are.
Should we go into a few tips? Because I think everybody's got a lot of experience, and it'd be nice, and also really answering your point. That kind of, maybe I don't know if we get the tips, but there's kind of no right set of questions, is there? It kind of depends who you're interviewing. But as you said, you prepare those. That's really good. But should I jot some kind of good things down that you found useful?
Your useful tips that you found from your experience in preparation or during as part of a methodology or
How to do it.
yeah.
And also, how do you make yourself not be intimidated by your subject? How do you strengthen yourself for the kind of moment of
Not ask for an autograph.
tips?
Well, personally, I try to make the interview more conversational.
Okay.
And I've conducted a bunch of my interviews over the email.
Oh, do you?
You conduct most of your interviews over email?
Yeah, some of them. I think half of them.
You think that works better for you than...
I think so. It works better in a way that I just send them a questionnaire, and this person asks the questions, and I just try to bring up together.
I think that's a very important point. I think we'll keep the kind of how do you do what's the format of the interview. That for me is a slightly different subject, because I don't always like email interviews, because you can't kind of read their body language. I do stuff on Skype if I can, phone as well. It kind of depends, but yeah.
Can I say something? Just I feel like that is sending those questions beforehand also prepares, but it could, if you expect them to type back and email back, then maybe that's creating work. But I think it is helpful in terms of preparing yourself for, even if you're going to have like a Skype conversation or a conversation beforehand, just to have a set of questions, even though you're not going to respond in writing to that. So I like to be prepared.
I put a question mark here, send questions, because it's interesting. Before coming this morning, I have a book which I'll put in the library here by Gilda Williams, and it's about different types of art writing and tips and all sorts. And I don't think it's available online, but we could check if it is. But What's interesting, she says, never send the questions in advance. And you think, well, some people insist on it and you can't get away without doing that. And also, I've been in a position where I've asked for questions in advance, so you can think about it, so you're not kind of rambling or whatever. But I think it's interesting that, of course, if you do send in questions, you might modulate them slightly, because when you've met them, some are more relevant or not. And I think one of the things with email, you write, you have the question, and you try and keep your questions sort of fairly short and succinct. You don't want a whole paragraph of question. If it's got lots of questions within it, I think it's easier to split it up. Otherwise, they don't answer some bits and they answer other bits. But the email is that you then get a very kind of big, long thing. Do you want it as much as that? Are you going to chop half of it out or not? I think if it's a back and forth, it's back to the making more conversational. There is more possibility to occasionally, as Joan was saying, to kind of pick up on something personal. I met for the first time yesterday Sana Katecha, and I'm trying to, Ugandan artist, and we had tried to meet before and we'd failed. And you know, he's quite a big name, he's done some really important things, I'm a bit in awe of him, I've never met him. And it was kind of interesting reflecting how our conversation went. So I tried to do my research. I wasn't doing an interview for a newspaper, so it was just for me and a possible future project or whatever. And it was kind of interesting that we did move in and out across the conversation about quite personal things. You know, he mentioned that he had to, after leaving me, and he had to leave at a certain time, he was going to take his grandchild to the airport. Or there was kind of, he'd lived in different places, and those things are very helpful. And then I also, when it felt relevant, but it wasn't about me, but occasionally added something about me, because it's a kind of, yeah?
It shows that you care. It shows that you are also human. I think if you just have that care element, or show that kind of care element of not just being here to extract information and then just, sure.
You want to develop, even if you're not going to meet very often, you want to develop a kind of personal relationship, don't you? To get kind of what you were saying, you know, you're not going to push things.
When the interview is done and my subject know it's done, he ended up saying something very good, like after. And I ended up using that soundbite. So I think it's good. Don't keep recording. Even if you know it's over. But you're going to say something that you might use in the...
As a soundbite.
Yeah, soundbite, yeah.
Yeah. Wait till the very end.
Yeah.
Okay.
Keep it rolling.
Keep it rolling, yeah.
Keep it rolling.
I think this comes, I feel very strongly that to put your mobile phone away, give them your undivided attention, even if they have to take a call. I mean, I think there's nothing that kind of makes people fed up when the other person kind of is moving in and out of it, and you think, hang on, you know, you've asked for this time, I'm doing this for you, so
Why are you not here?
so it's being respectful in perhaps a whole variety of ways. Dress.
Mention if you'll be bringing a photographer, or you know. Then I mean, don't just rock up with your girlfriend or boyfriend. Be like, no, after this we are going on a date. Don't make your business their business.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think we can move on to challenges, or maybe there are some challenges, just very briefly, because there's some exercise that I think we wanted to do as part of this, just in the interest of time. So yeah, in the same way, just going around the room, sharing some challenges that people can talk from experience, and maybe just sharing how we can best prepare or for such challenges.
I thought they already mentioned some challenges.
Yeah. Language translation. Yeah, I don't know if you mentioned. And we've mentioned how to be on top of the situation. I don't know if this is a challenge or not, but I think if sometimes we have budgets and we don't have budgets, because if you're going to interview someone at Big Kafunda, I think you don't just give them water. Things like that where there's a challenge that you don't have a budget because it's...
And you have to decide whether kind of a coffee or a tea, or really kind of not a bottle of bourbon, is something you can do. I think it is making the other person comfortable, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's a comfort issue for that person.
Will you send me your draft? I think don't take it personally. I think some people have had bad experiences which are not your fault at all, but have, and therefore kind of that's what they want. Some people are very, very controlling, so it's part of their nature. And then I think there are two ways to respond to that, because it's often tricky. Sometimes I do send the whole thing, but I'm very clear in the accompanying email, this is not a kind of rerun of the interview. And I try and do that politely. But of course I invite, if there's any facts they feel I've got wrong, I invite them to make comment on that. And then the other thing is, if it's quotes, so one way of responding is sometimes I'm very happy to send you the quotations I'm going to use and make sure we've got those right. And that's a kind of halfway stage.
Don't just say you got what you wanted from this person and then you ran away. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
To everybody.